what really went on here was a massive Ponzi scheme with a number of players, a number of investment banks were involved in this. And what this did is phony securitizations supplied the money for fraudulent lending in the United States on a massive scale. Now, I always talk about the housing market because most people understand it, and it's the largest part of the U.S. economy. This activity did a lot of damage to the U.S. economy, and the investment banks have not been held accountable. First of all, notice what they did here. They took, a synthetic CDO, the most complicated tail end of the Ponzi scheme. What the banks really, what they should have gone after them is accounting fraud. Because at all of these firms, during the S&L crisis, there were 1,100 criminal indictments. There has been more damage to the U.S. economy as a result of this activity. The fraud was more widespread, it was much more massive, and there haven't been the criminal indictments. And that's because Wall Street has basically bought off Congress. Of course we should hold people accountable for that kind of activity, and those are the people that we want to drum out of the business.
Why is there this sort of tacit acknowledgement that they're going to let this go on, that a little bit of shady dealing is okay?
It's a matter of going after the correct issues. And I think that this is really something that we've got to clean up. And I'm not going to stay silent about it. The facts are what they are, and they're irrefutable. I looked at every single one of Merrill's deals that came to market in 2007. And before these deals closed, I said, this deal shouldn't close. It's a classic situation for fraud. The SEC should be shutting down these financial meth labs. The SEC didn't do its job. But Merrill also did not write down these securitizations. Instead, they took losers, clearly losing products, stuffed it into deals, and sold. And for Goldman, this will just be basically a traffic ticket. This is a sham, and this is a disgrace. At this point, we should be having indictments for accounting fraud. And when you go after the basic fraud, which was supplying money for fraudulent lending and packaging fraudulent loans, and basically just covering it all up by then having another securitization that was more complicated to cover up the fact that the first one was fraudulent. And that's how a Ponzi scheme works. At the end, you saw an acceleration of the most complicated product in the shortest period of time just to cover this all up. And that is a classic situation of what happens at the tail end of a Ponzi scheme. So, we should be going after all of these players. You start with the basics, and as you roll up, your discovery then will capture everyone else who is involved in it as well. But instead, what our administration has done is starved the FBI of funding. President Obama does not need to say "Mother, may I" to Republicans to tell the FBI to go in there and just start their investigations and swarm all over these guys. Instead, what they did, though, is they basically starved their budget so they don't have the manpower to do it. We are being totally mocked in the United States. I think we live to entertain.
So if you understand this dynamic, I'm saying, and I'm sure people on both sides of the Fed and Goldman's and all the, if you're on the inside of Wall Street, you know all of this.
Right.
So what you're doing is creating the bubble because you know when to get out.
Exactly.
You'll get out, the bubble will burst, and there'll be another whack of people losing their pension funds.
Except the funny bit is that they're all telling themselves this. I mean, I even heard some of my investor friends were saying that were basically everybody, at least the investor types, and you presume the Wall Street types are thinking this way also, that the Fed's creating a bubble, we're going to ride the bubble, everybody's all in. And the problem is this was the same mentality people had in early 2007. You could tell it was going to end badly. And everybody thought that, oh, we'll just ride it and we'll be able to get out on time, we'll be able to save our hide. Even the professionals couldn't. That's why we had a crisis. That what happens in a crisis is suddenly the number of trades and the volume of trades you can do collapses. And they can't exit. They think they can exit in time, and the reality is the exit shrinks.
What do they
and
care?
Only very few people get through.
They're going to get their bonuses. And too big to fail is still too big to fail.
Right.
So it doesn't matter what the finance reform legislation was. We know it didn't solve too big to fail, and they'll come back again.
Yeah.
So why not? What's to lose? Except the rest of the society has a lot to lose.
Well, the one thing that might happen this time, if we have a crash sooner rather than later, is people are already profoundly angry with the banks. And if we have a crisis of some type in, I would say, the next 6 to 18 months, there's going to have to be a pound of flesh for another round of bailouts. It's not going to be acceptable for there to be another round of bailouts without at least the management of major firms being fired. I mean, there will have to be some. The progressive wing is certainly very unhappy with Obama, and yet he's delivered right-wing policies, but with enough left-wing rhetoric that the Republicans can shoot at him. They can sort of take advantage of his confused positioning versus what he's actually been up to. So I think it's just been a very bad policy.
But what I'm getting at is that if, from the point of view of small business and retired people,
right.
who, if we understand the demographics of who voted
Yeah.
Republican
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
especially Tea Party movement, that's a very high percentage of who makes up that movement, retired people and small business. It's not only, but they're a big
Right.
piece. Aren't they going to be some of the first people to get creamed by austerity
Yes,
measures? And
absolutely. Well, this goes back to what Thomas Frank was saying, and that there's large segments of the population who have been persuaded for social reasons to vote against their economic interests. Unfortunately, this has become a well-established pattern with large groups within the public. And I think that part of this is that there is a big racist element in the vote against Obama. Like, I have family in Alabama, and 88% of the white people voted against Obama. The second, and there is a feeling among older white people of being sort of beleaguered, and that they're sort of losing out, that all the things that the sort of traditional middle class, if you saved, if you did the right thing, you'd have a decent retirement. That's all being pulled out from under them, and yet they've been steered to blame the wrong people for why they're.
But am I right that if you have no more government stimulus
Yeah.
and you have smaller government,
Absolutely.
what's likely to happen is deeper depression, low interest rates.
Right.
So people want more interest on their retirement savings, are not going to get higher
That's
interest
right.
rates. Small business are going to have no market to sell to because there's going to be higher unemployment.
Mm-hmm.
So two of the pillars of this movement are going to be ones that get creamed. I mean, is the logic right?
No, your logic is absolutely correct, but I'm just saying that they've been sold. Yes, they've been sold a bill of goods.
Because they're being sold that there's going to be some economic revival at a smaller government.
I don't even know that they've really. Well, that's yes. This whole government. It's the whole
Get regulation and government out of the way, and business will be free to invest.
And it's just not going to happen.
Okay, so I don't get this. They're going to be the retired people in small business are going to be the first one killed by what's coming.
Exactly. Well, what happened, turns out, was basically like the turkey deciding to vote for Thanksgiving.
So people better stop taking economics on faith and try to get a handle on what's really happening to them.
Exactly.
I've been the iconoclast who disagrees with all these sort of doom and gloom scenarios, and I will explain why. When I was the mortgage manager, I was there at the time when Paul Volcker drove interest rates to levels we have never seen before and never seen since. Mortgage rates went from 10% to over 20%. And these were just apocalyptic times. The mortgage delinquency ratio in Canada at that time, 1980-81, went from 0.5% to 1%. And so my argument is these people predicting doom and gloom and apocalypse do not understand that Canadian consumers have a very, very deep attachment to their house, and they will do whatever they have to do to make the payment on that mortgage. They'll default on their utility payments. They'll default on their credit card. They will default on their car payment, but they will not default on their house. I have people coming into me who are unemployed, they lost their jobs, and they made their payment every month on time. And I was astonished at where they got the money. Well, we can guess. It was the mothers and fathers and the brothers and the sisters in this country that came to the rescue privately in each family.